Actually, there is one thing that we need to think about, the question that was raised. Should we talk about land grabs or land deals or corporate acquisition of land? I think it is a useful question because land grabs, it is a loaded term, and sometimes perhaps in some academic discussion it may not be proper to use it. However, I do think when negotiations, legal or otherwise, have been made about land between governments and investors over the heads of the people who have been using that land, not illegally, for decades or centuries. And to me it doesn't matter whether they are custom communities or just groups of people from different parts who have been cultivating this land, then I think it is legitimate to talk of a land grab. And it also becomes legitimate to talk of the rights and the ways which people might have to grab land back when it has been taken from them in this way, and or when the promises that the investors have made about jobs, employment, infrastructure, provision of schools, clinics, etc., have not been fulfilled when they are messing up the environment, etc., then people have actually have every right to demand the right to grab the land back.
First is the global context. Even though a lot of the investors are domestic, all of them work within a global context that influences what's happening at the national level. The change in the agro-industrial commodity regime from one dominated by Western corporate investors now to one in which a lot of non-Western investors are important, especially Asian investors here in Indonesia and the Philippines. Often state-supported, we have a polycentric commodity regime right now instead of dominated by so-called global north. That we're interested in what kind of effects it has on the ground. The global governance of land. Land governance has become a global issue of concern, which multilateral organizations are looking at ways to limit more or less negative effects on indigenous people, small farmers. National governments are also concerned with this. There's a global discourse now going on on how to channel this into ways that are not too detrimental to the situation of local populations. So what influence has that had on policies in Indonesia and the Philippines? Now the relationships between the state and rural society, I think, is a very important one, and all of the researchers, the state from national to local level is of course very present. We see the problem of legal ambiguities, of conflicting land laws, has also been mentioned in presentations here before us, of agrarian reform, of making land available to investors, of giving indigenous people a right to their land. Those are all conflicting land laws and regulations that may come into play with these large land deals. Then what role does the state play? Does it facilitate land deals? Or does it try to restrict it, protect local populations? Now within the state, there are different interest groups, different agencies with their own agendas and their own policies. And again, this is behind also conflicting land laws. Which agencies and interest groups have the most influence in directing policy and in actually affecting what's going on the ground? Then there's, you see a tension between still redistributive policies of the state for agrarian reform, redistribution, and on the other hand, really facilitating these huge agribusiness projects. There's a big tension between the two. And it is also a, let's say, a power struggle within the state itself.
What do they mean by efficient? And why do they think that large-scale farming is more efficient than small-scale? To go further into these questions, we need to be clear about the concept of efficiency. The pro-large-scale camp very often equates efficiency either with greater labor productivity, which is not necessarily a first priority for a country like Indonesia, or the private profitability of the farm enterprise from an agribusiness management point of view. A more appropriate concept of efficiency is social efficiency. That means efficiency in meeting society's key developmental imperatives and goals. In this way of thinking, we need to ask which type of farming makes best use of excess resources, such as labor, and how much of the income it generates will go to the pockets of the relatively poor. These become then relevant for policy purposes. And the appropriate criteria for assessing social efficiency can change depending on the place and the time, stage of development, and so on. If we look, for example, at Indonesia today, where rice and other food crops are now imported on a large scale, food prices are unstable and unpredictable, income distribution is skewed, unemployment is high, environmental issues becoming very serious. What they're talking about, in other words, these economists are saying that land should have a social function. In agrarian studies, there's been a long-standing debate about the so-called inverse relationship. That means the negative relationship between farm size and output per hectare. It was noted first by John Stuart Mill, that's why I keep on mentioning his name. The smaller the size of the farm, the greater its productivity per hectare. The smaller the farm, in general, the less land that is left uncultivated, the greater its cropping intensity, the more higher value crops are planted on it. And for most crops, maybe not all crops, the greater the yield per hectare per harvest.
Kinds of important issues are related to it. I could see that state-society relations, labor relations, power struggles. So that I think is a very positive thing, that issues that have been on the agenda of social science for a long time are now brought in a different way. And they're also related to older discussions, and I came up with several of them. The second thing is the waves of outsourcing that was brought up. So this is like, it's often thought of as a kind of a third wave of outsourcing after the outsourcing of production, the outsourcing of IT knowledge. Now it seems to be that land and agricultural production is outsourced. And the third one is the three different types of food regimes that we had over the last centuries. The idea of the British hegemony of food regime, getting food from developing countries to the center of Europe and the US. The second one, the American way of getting production, surplus production of agriculture in the US to the rest of the world. And now we seem to have reached the third stage where kind of this land grabbing is part of that, where a lot of non-European, non-American countries are now involved in getting food production in other parts of the developing world. The global order of very fast movement of capital, of knowledge, of finance, that makes it, I would argue, different from the earlier patterns of outsourcing. And the second thing is that by looking at land grabbing, we only look at agriculture. And we seem to assume that agriculture is the only thing that these people that we deal with, that is what they're involved in. And there's so many other activities that they're involved in. So how can we look at it both at the household level, as well as at the national level and at the international level, at the various, not to look at agriculture separate from other sectors of society, because that makes a big difference. And in order to do that, we need a historical perspective to see what the developments are. So that's the main thing that I want to.
And we have to, what you call it, expand our observation, of course, with some time constraint and resources. And, we are not only view the global land deals in the agriculture's point of view, but also extend to the other sectors. And it is because in my thinking that when I see how productive land in Java compared to other uses, it was because of the infrastructure, not because of the agriculture motive, but because of the economic motive of physical development. So I think this is quite interesting. In some place, region, we can see the land will be covered by agricultural crops. But on the other hand, there will be also degradation of the agricultural land on the other hand in similar region, but different location. If we can find the location of the global land deals, say for example in a very vast area that already planted with genetic modifying organism, then I think that this course analysis, something like that, are quite useful to apply. Instead, if it's not, then we didn't capture the other dynamics of civilization. And genetic modifying crops also has a global dimension, as political economic process also.
Since this is the session for the key analytical issues and factors that could be developed for future research, policy work and advocacy work. So I think we need to remember that don't forget the gender issues. It's been very few the literature on the gender and land fields is very limited. The literature on the gender and land access to land and natural resources is very old. So Bina Agarwal considered as the classic, although some critics now coming up. So I think it is important to seriously consider to develop either research, policy work, or advocacy work to explore how gender, not only as a cultural construction, but as an analytical concept, along with other variables, political, socio-cultural, economic, geographical, political locations, are critical aspects in examining the problems of land deals. And also, in terms of policy analysis, it is also, I think, the time, and this is not also a new approach, but it is the time to develop what's so-called a feminist lens in assessing policy processes. And theoretically, it's a bit behind, so it's very old, so the literature. So this is a challenges for researchers and challenges too for the people who work in policy advocacy, as long as the activists who work at the ground level. So all the actions will also contribute to the development of the theories. So don't think that theories only developed at the, say, academic community, but activists, I believe, could also contribute to the theories based on the really actions and experiences. Thank you.
Where we discuss about the issue of global land deals. From various different land deals, we have to learn something about, the need for equitable and equal justice for all, because this is the gross example where we find the land concentrations. But we learn already from our own research, from their research, from the discussions that we have to have an agenda to address the structure of the land inequality and how to deliver justice by creating a critics toward the land concentrations and to support the various way to deliver justice through social movements and through critical, scholarship. I think this is very important for the larger agrarian studies. if we trace back the reviving of the agrarian studies in Indonesia, it is very important to recognize that through this kind of discussion, we will connect with the larger debate in the international level. This is not the beginning. We already started, and we will continue that with various different activities. We believe that we are on the right track, and we will see in the future the bright development of the Indonesian agrarian studies.